both of them have taken data from us to see which regions of the US it makes more sense to go to ICE versus electric vehicles. And even sometimes, Nate, which regions of the US make more sense to be all-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive. All those aspects of decision making are I think, easier with the data that we're using.
Welcome to Manufacturing Insiders. Today I have Amit Kapur with me. He is the CEO of Zeeba, which is it's a nationwide company that's really shaking up logistics as it applies to manufacturers. And he's going to have some really interesting insights to share with us today about maybe just some ways that manufacturers haven't thought about their logistics operations, kind of comparing and contrasting, the advantages of leasing versus buying, and the advantage of really integrating technology into logistics, which Zeeba has done a great job at. So welcome to Manufacturing Insiders, Amit.
Thank you for having me, Nate. Look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. One other quick note before we jump into it. If you're watching this video, go ahead and just hit that like on the video and go ahead and subscribe to our channel. If you're seeing it on LinkedIn, make sure you follow us. We're going to be sharing a lot more content with manufacturers just about how to optimize their operations, integrate technology, and just overall become more successful. So Amit, tell me about Zeeba and what you're really bringing to the marketplace.
Yeah, so Nate, I think, distribution and logistics is sort of a time-tested industry. You look back to the 2008-2012 recession, distribution actually went up. Transportation needs, of course, continuously commensurate to that growth, are continuously growing as well. Similarly, in 2020, when the world sort of stopped and paused, distribution, logistics behind distribution, all of that, the needs for that and the capacity for that also increased. So Zeeba's goal is to play an intricate part in the businesses that are looking for solutions, not just from the optimization standpoint of production, but how do we really work in tandem and hand in hand to get these goods and products over to the service, the customers that require these provisions. And so one of the things that we offer, of course, is the right type of economics to be able to afford these vehicles, but also data and analytics to showcase whether the vehicles that you're using are optimized in the most efficient manner. And are you able to, capture some of the cost savings associated with these efficiencies?
Sure. Yeah. And so, I think this is important stuff to think about. So let's just take, your typical manufacturer out there. Let's kind of picture a manufacturing service provider like, injection molded that's making plastic components and, shipping them to the OEM who's then assembling them, or perhaps a machine shop that's having the metal parts. Tell me about, kind of a success story that you've had in a space like that, where maybe they were thinking about it in an inefficient way or a costly way, and you guys really helped change that for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the production mechanism plays an important part of the ecosystem. And so it's important for you to have economies of scale. In order to do that, you have to have customers that are at least nationwide, if not worldwide. And so I think Zeeba really looks to solve the nationwide issue of distribution, any problems that persist with that economics. We've had customers that are in the manufacturing industry that utilize sort of 3PL services of delivery and mechanisms associated with creating their own vehicle. And in turn, they sort of become susceptible to depreciation risks, basically the economics associated with not businesses that are not germane to their system. And so when you take on the ownership model of these vehicles, you take on risks that you might perhaps not be used to. That's where Zeeba sort of comes into the play. We make sure that the total cost of ownership really falls on us, and we're able to solve your issues so that you can focus on issues germane to the delivery process. And so we've had customers that went from owning 50 to 75 vehicles that instead outsourced all of that ownership to us and worked together with us to truly understand their issues what economics work for them, and allow us to provide leases and rental agreements so that they can focus on their business in hand and figure out ways of optimizing really the production and manufacturing components of the business, as opposed to ownership, capex, operating issues associated with vehicles, and so on and so forth. We effectively have alleviated their concerns on ancillary forms of operations versus the key intricate details of their primary focus.
Okay. So in practice, that looks like a company that already had their own fleet and had experienced challenges with that. Which there are some benefits, right, to owning the vehicles. You can obviously offset capital gains with depreciation and things of that nature. But you're saying that sometimes those tax benefits don't add up to the benefits they could see from potentially leasing.
Well, that's precisely right, Nate. You're correct. I mean, amortization, depreciation are aspects of offsetting profits and take on those tax shelters. And by the way, we offer those as well. You can have operating and financial leases that allow you to book amortization with Zeeba, and that does help offset your profitability. However, the reality of it is that if you're not in the game of owning vehicles, and if you don't know exactly the risks associated with internal combustion engine vehicles or even electric vehicle issues, you might be taking on risks that you weren't aware of. Towards the end of 2022, you saw a major growth for electric vehicles, and OEMs were backing their pricing, vehicles were holding value, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Come mid 2023, towards the end of 2023, you saw certain players like Tesla have major drops in pricing. And I think it becomes difficult, if you're not in the industry, to truly understand how that magnanimously affects every OEM and the values associated with electric vehicles in tandem. Effectively, Ford started cutting their pricing and slicing their pricing with new vehicles as well. Now, that might sound great from a purchase perspective, but if you had just purchased a few months or even a year before that, you got hit with depreciation, unnatural depreciation that you weren't even aware of. So effectively, those vehicles, they lose value much more than you had projected. And so you're taking on those risks and components of risk. We're there to help alleviate some of those burdens, but also eliminate the investment that you have to make in keeping up with the vehicles and the maintenance, and really take on that entire burden ourselves. Our services don't end there, though, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about the data and the analytics associated with everything that we're doing.
Yeah. No, and that is very interesting stuff. I want to jump back real quick, though. So it sounded like you almost have sort of a hybrid between ownership and leasing where you can experience tax benefits. Can you just discuss how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So financial leases work in a way where you're making monthly payments, but the monthly payments go towards almost like a debt service, a quasi debt service. And what ends up happening is you're able to capitalize those vehicles on your balance sheet, and in turn book depreciation and amortization against it. So it gives you sort of an ownership without the necessary risk of residual value, remarketing, and exit value drain. But it's also important to note, Nate, if you're not in the market, you might think that at any given time you can go and make a 50 vehicle order or a 10 vehicle order from an OEM and work with a dealer to effectively, provide the sale of those vehicles. But you actually have to have the wherewithal for the OEM to book these vehicles on your behalf. And so if you don't have that allocation, you don't even get an opportunity to make those purchases. And so coming to, a player like Zeeba in the market, we can actually allocate those to you from our own allocation of vehicles. And I think that's the exciting part, is being able to make moves in a very nimble manner, as opposed to having to fleet plan for a year or 18 months in ahead, which is what Zeeba, of course, does, and takes that tension away from you.
Right. Okay. So So talk to me about the technology and so people can either buy vehicles from you or they can lease vehicles from you. Do they have the opportunity to use some of the technology that we had talked about before in either of those scenarios?
Yeah, they can actually rent vehicles from us or lease vehicles from us.
Rent or
And
lease.
they do have the opportunity to tie into our ecosystem of technology as well to make conscientious and data-driven decisions. Most effectively, Nate, we have tremendous amount of hardware and software allocated to our vehicle, and all of this provides us an immense amount of data. And data is great if you use it. Otherwise, it becomes cumbersome and overbearing. And so, what we realized a couple of years ago is it was extremely important for us to note that our vehicles are going all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going all over the country in the most efficient manner? Well, at the end of the day, depending on the lease or rental agreement, that could become cumbersome for you. But even if it isn't, it could become cumbersome for you from a profit and loss perspective, an SG&A perspective. And in order to keep your administrative costs lower, we actually capture information that allow you to do that.
So what kind of information are we talking about?
Yeah. So, you might have a fleet of 10 vehicles, for example, that travel nationally. The data that we capture could help, make you understand that, look, it might be cost prohibitive for you to be at 10 vehicles. It might make more sense for you to be at 6 vehicles or maybe even 15 vehicles. While there might be an additional add-on in terms of monthly payments to a rental or a leasing agreement, your operating costs could be effectively lowered. And we actually show that delta that you're able to capture and whether it makes sense for you to do a lease agreement with 10 vehicles, 6 vehicles, or 15 vehicles. It also allows us to take that information, analyze it for you, and make you look at the equation a little bit differently. Perhaps the longer term leases bring on too much maintenance costs associated with things like transmissions and oil changes and engines, and maybe shifting over to an electric vehicle solution is something that we can adhere to and allow you to put you in a better position for success. It also gets as granular, Nate, into sort of the driver behaviors and which driver is more efficient, which routes are more efficient, and maybe sometimes even which days are more efficient.
Right, right. Do you find data like that to be most helpful on sort of a national perspective? Or when you've got, a company that's operating maybe in a 50-mile radius where they're really making deliveries of their parts, so you have a lot more of these shorter routes versus longer routes, or do you kind of see the benefits equal?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. The reality of it is the shorter the route, probably the less likelihood that you'll be putting on sort of wasted cost, right? But suffice it to say, it really depends on your throughput. If you are running that same 50-mile radius route 10 times a day, well, now
Mm-hmm.
you're at a 500-mile mark, right? So if
Right.
your throughput isn't limited by the distance in one particular route, then you still fall prey to those decision-making opportunities, and that's why we're there. We're there for you.
Right. So, do you have any really good examples that you can think of a company that's used this data and made some significant changes the way that they do it, and obviously save money, increase revenue, whatever it might be?
Yeah, some of the largest companies in the world utilize our services for that. I mean,
Hmm.
if you look at the shift from I would say, an ESG component that these large companies are making, companies like Amazon and UPS and FedEx, they're looking to optimize sort of less um, cumbersome vehicles on the environment. And so, in order to limit their carbon footprint, they are making shifts and paradigmatic shifts to that effect to the EV market. But more so than that, along with that comes a tremendous amount of savings, depending on sort of your market, your target, and how you penetrate the industry, right? Mm-hmm. So Amazon uses sort of a third party delivery service provider system that allows them to alleviate their burden. Whereas UPS focuses more so on a sort of corporate basis decision-making process. So both of them have taken data from us to see which regions of the US it makes more sense to go to ICE versus electric vehicles. And even sometimes, Nate, which regions of the US make more sense to be all-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive. All those aspects of decision making are I think, easier with the data that we're able to provide.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you analyze a company's the viability of leasing vehicles from you versus using more of a traditional 3PL solution? Like, how do you know when one is right to do and the other is right to do?
Yeah. So look, I mean, in your example earlier about sort of manufacturing component parts that end up being part of the process in order to create these consumer goods, really 3PL isn't as much of an option, right? A 3PL will take the entire scenario, package everything for you, set up the bill of lading, deliver to the end consumer or the retail sector, and they'll basically be an all-in-one encompassing opportunity. Now, with that comes a tremendous amount of cost, and your option really is do you outsource that to a 3PL, or do you invest the capital in creating an infrastructure that can help facilitate that internally? Those decisions become very, very cumbersome for consumer goods, and you do have to make those decisions. And as a company like Zeeba, we come in and we can just handle specifics of delivery for you, so you don't have to outsource the entire thing and take on this added burden of cost. But if you're a B2B or a B2B2B and you're looking to ship these components to the end manufacturer or one of the other members of the production line, you don't even have that option of 3PL, and you do have to utilize shipping opportunities. So either you can spend that money, with on a per unit basis, and we can all see with rising inflation comes rising costs, or you can create economies of scale internally and take on opportunities of rental agreements or lease agreements with Zeeba. And we capitulate to the needs of the customers to help create better unit costs for them.
I see. So 3PL, there's obviously pick and choose components, like you said, the packaging and that sort of stuff. So if a company is doing all of the finished processing, they're packaging the items, getting them ready to ship, in those cases, a lot of times it makes sense to have your own fleet internally. So what do they usually do, I guess? What would be an alternative to what you offer? And I'm just trying to wrap my head around what's the best use case.
Yeah. And they can look, if they have sort of non-regional customers and they need to ship one-off units from here, let's just say they're in California and they need to ship it, across the country to Florida, right? Maybe it makes sense for them to use the services of FedEx or UPS. But if they have sort of a density of regional customers and they're able to, make many shipments a day, and those shipments are regional or they're reachable by driving, then it would make far more sense for them to utilize our services, rent vehicles, and use these vehicles to make those deliveries on a daily basis without taking on the risk of total cost of ownership.
Right. Okay. So in a lot of cases, this could be a company that has grown to the point where it's starting to make sense to have their own fleet. And then you also have a whole other realm of considerations, like, well, now I have to hire drivers and I have to understand, CDL certification and, a whole other set of safety procedures and all this kind of stuff. Is there anything you guys can do to help out with those aspects of setup?
Yeah. You don't have to worry about CDL as much, Nate, just because, depending on the state or the municipality, you'd be shocked as to how many normal driving licenses it takes, how many states are involved in just utilizing normal driving licenses to make deliveries.
Right.
And your point about scale is very important. While it's probably beneficial for many large companies, our services meet the needs of very small companies as well. We have bakeries, for example, that utilize our services just one or two vehicles at a time. And while yes, you would have to go out there and hire drivers, the question becomes is, does it make sense for you to send out shipped goods, that are regional or geographically centered around your location for $12, $13 a product? Or does it make more sense for you to have a van with a driver that can help make those deliveries? Invariably, the economies of scale is going to kick in. If you're selling a pack of six muffins, for example, for $8, and you have to tack on $13 or $14 of that for delivery, it makes that unit $22 to the end consumer.
Right.
It just doesn't make economic sense for you to have that alternative. So regardless of whether you're a small business or a large business, the economies of scale kick in quite quickly.
Right. Right. So as far as, like the hiring the drivers and things like that, you guys don't get involved at all with that sort of thing, do you?
We don't. While we have drivers internally, it's mainly because we're vertically integrated and we offer transportation benefits as well. So if you're, out in Montana, for example, and you need our vehicles to be transferred to your Montana location, we can facilitate that because we also are vertically integrated with transport of our vehicles to the end user. But we don't hire drivers to participate in the operating end of your business.
I see. Okay. So if somebody had a one-off need, that's not something you would get involved in, to move it from Montana to Pennsylvania or whatever it might be.
The vehicle, perhaps, yes, depending on the need, but not the service of the vehicle. It wouldn't make sense for us to deliver your good from one place to another.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, actually, so I'm actually going to be going out to Montana in October, and it'll be my first elk hunt. Like, I'm a big whitetail hunter, but I've dreamed of doing elk hunting, and I'm finally getting to go out there and do it. And so I'm like, so if I get one, what exactly am I going to do from there?
That's a decision, Nate, that you'll have to make. And we actually have many clients in Billings, Montana, a beautiful town. But yeah, I think overarchingly, if you look at, the tread of so many different cities and states, every terrain is different. And our goal is to be in a position where whenever the client needs a very specific type of vehicle, we can be that solution for them. Over and above, there comes downtime with the vehicle, storage becomes need, transporting the vehicles from one state to another, that becomes need. And as you continue to grow and look to create efficiencies in the operation of those vehicles, our data becomes a need.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the future look like for you guys? I mean, we've heard a lot of talk about, self-driving semis and things like that. Are you looking into integrating that sort of technology with your vehicles?
Invariably, Nate, the technology starts to impact and drive your decisions that you make internally. The good news about us is we are a provider of vehicles, not necessarily a provider of drivers, right? So when you get these sort of self-driving vehicles, the question invariably goes to, well, how do you get allocation for them? And because of our relationship with some of the largest OEMs, we would have ownership of these vehicles and we would be that source for our customers to obtain those vehicles. So we're excited as technology continues to get better and better. There will be new products that the OEM puts on the horizon. And so we continue to invest in that knowledge and continue to invest in those relationships so that we'll be in the forefront of allocation when those vehicles do become available.
Okay. Yeah. What would be your biggest piece of advice for, a mid-sized manufacturer, one of those service contract manufacturers, when it comes to their logistics and shipping?
Yeah. Well, as a manufacturer, you have so many important and intricate roles. You can't be everywhere at all times, right? You have to look at sort of the steps associated with every aspect of your business and what you can invest in and what you can outsource in an efficient manner. And so, what I would say is do a 360. Look at your business, see where it's best to invest your own time in, and does it make sense for you to have capital expenditure that, sure, creates another asset for you, but also can create a liability that you might be susceptible to? And if you're willing to take that risk, it might make financial sense for you. But if companies like UPS and Amazon and FedEx don't want to own these vehicles, there's probably something that's telling you why it makes most sense to focus on the aspect of manufacturing and leaving the delivery services to those that can help you alleviate those burdens. And also truly understanding unit economics. I think when you do cost accounting, it's very important, Nate, for you to look at aspects of decisions and say, how does this impact our P&L? And then in turn, how does this impact our balance sheet? It's always great to have, a sort of rigorous financial plan and budgeting for your company. And depending on where you want to spend your money from a capital investment perspective versus an operating investment perspective, we can be that solution for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, and I think a lot of owners would just defer to their CPA or their accountant to assume that they know the answer to these questions. But wouldn't it be cool? And I don't know, maybe you guys have done this, but wouldn't it be cool if you had like a calculator on your website that would be like, okay, how much do you currently spend in your logistics costs? How many miles do you drive? How many pounds of parts you, whatever the factors are. And then it would say, this is what makes most sense for you. You should lease or you shouldn't, like that would be a super cool tool, wouldn't it?
Well, we know it would be cool, Nate, because we actually have that.
Oh, you
And
do?
we actually have it internally. Now, we don't put it online. It's not something that we market online. It's something that we actually do internally for our customers. So
Okay.
you could actually come to us and say, look, I have, a vehicle that is XYZ year. It has 30,000 miles on it. It has a lot of tread. Does it make sense for me to continue to invest in these vehicles? Or based on our routes, our systems, our deliveries, and the number of drivers we have, does it make sense for us to work with Zeeba? And we can calculate to the cent whether it would be more advantageous for you to
Oh, that's
take on a
huge.
rental lease agreement. It's part of the data that that we were speaking about earlier, and our sort of head of fleet strategy helps create those documents and helps create that information for our customers.
That's fantastic. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it would really behoove anybody to at least have a conversation with you guys and run through that and just, make a decision from there. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, I would agree, Nate. I think it's important for us to be a solution for companies that are looking for that solution. And oftentimes, especially over the last 2.5 years, the volatility in vehicle ownership and the value of these vehicles has become much less predictable. In
Hmm.
2020 and 2021, you could buy a vehicle and flip it for $15,000 or $20,000
Yeah.
more 6 months later. Right
Right.
now, these are of course anomalies in the supply chain of the industry. But if you're on the wrong end of that at the wrong time, that can be demonstratively, unbeneficial to you. So I think for us, we want to make sure that we can create levels of consistency for our customers so that they know what they can rely on. They know what they wake up with tomorrow versus having to guess or versus having to have that headache all the while they're trying to figure out their line production, their manufacturing, and all the variables that are associated with that. So it's an interesting space for us, and we've been excited, been lucky and fortunate to have customers some of the largest and some of the smallest in America, that allow us to help with those decision processes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really, I think it's really cool that you guys have the technology and you can help people figure these things out. Because I think that's what, good business that services manufacturers is understanding that they have their own focus and it's generally tied to their own production. And you're the subject matter expert on transportation. Somebody else might be on the robotics, whatever. But being able to kind of spell these things out and make it really easy to absorb, I think is really important. So you guys have done a great job at that.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, I mean, look, as we continue to get more and more intricate with the processes of our customers, and we look at just distribution and logistics as a whole, it's great that e-commerce has provided this platform for success for so many companies. But it's clear that that direction is going to only take on more and more in terms of solutions. And we just want to be one aspect of that solution for our customers.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for coming on today. And, I think it was very informative and helpful. And I'm sure that some people in the audience will reach out and they would just go to drivezeeba.com and fill out a form there.
That's right. You can fill out the form right there. The request, all of your information is captured in a safe manner. It shoots out to our sales team through our Salesforce mechanism. And within, a couple of hours at most, someone will be in touch with you. And as you said, it's simply drivezeeba.com.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure, Nate. Thanks for having me.